We are approaching the end of the 2026 NFL Draft as I'm recording this, and we're in the final hours of it. So today, I'm going to talk about some of my favorite drafts and really highlight some of the teams that I think really took advantage of the 2026 NFL Draft. It is a really interesting one. Things were kind of all over the place. I don't think people had crazy reactions like they have with other years. Ty Simpson has been the only major thing people have overreacted to in this draft class, and I understand why. We'll talk about that probably in another video. But today, we're going to talk about some of my favorite drafts. So this is Son of a Sports. Let's get into it. I think I have to start with my Dallas Cowboys because I really did like their draft. Caleb Downs, I talked about it in my first round reactions video. If you haven't seen that, I would suggest looking at that if you want to see more in depth about my first round or how I felt about the first round picks. But with Caleb Downs, come on, man. I was jumping for joy. This is one of my favorite picks I think the Cowboys have ever made initially. Maybe it ages differently. I loved Micah Parsons' pick later on. I loved the CeeDee Lamb pick when it happened. Then later on, the Tyler Smith pick, I didn't love it at first, and then I loved it later on. Caleb Downs is someone that I think a lot of people have looked at as the guy of this draft class for a long time. And I'm not saying that just as a Cowboys fan. I'm saying that as someone that loves Caleb Downs. And then you look down the board. Malachi Lawrence wasn't someone I was really, looking at until the final week before when I was hearing rumors Dallas was liking him. And I feel more confident about this pick that they moved down, got extra fourths, because with the Cowboys, I think that Lawrence adds a pass rush specialist element that they needed. I think they need more run defense still. I think they need more in the linebackers, and that's kind of where this draft is missing. But I still feel a lot more confident in this defensive line and defense with Lawrence, Barham, and Overton, who all add a different set of skills. Barham in the third round, I loved. He's more of a raw pass rusher, but someone that at Michigan really in his last year was the athletic guy on that defense. He's really fast. His speed just pops off on tape, man. It is crazy. I think he could provide some, uniqueness at linebacker that the Cowboys could get creative with. I think it could play him in coverage a little bit as an off-ball linebacker. I think him and Lawrence together just adds a different element of speed to this defensive line that they needed with guys like Ezra Raku and Randy Gregory there. Devin Moore, another interesting piece. The later picks that the Cowboys made in this draft class are guys that I don't know if they're going to be stars. I wouldn't bet on it, but I do think could be guys that really threaten the starting jobs of guys on this Cowboys defense that thought they were comfortable going into today and the weekend in general. The Carolina Panthers did what they were supposed to do in this draft class. I don't know about what they were supposed to do. They just did a really good job. I think that they did what they were supposed to do in this offseason. They went out in free agency and addressed the two biggest needs and the guys on the market that were young, needed new contracts, and came off really good seasons in Jalen Phillips and Devin Lloyd. Then they go out in the draft and say, all right, we have a ton of free space to really play with now because we don't have to go with need. So they went out and got Monroe Freeling, who will eventually be a need, or is at a position that will eventually be a need at tackle. Ike Mekwonu is coming off an injury. Rasheed Walker is on a one-year deal for only $10 million, which tells us how the league actually views him. Taylor Moton is in his 30s and is potentially a free agent after this coming season. Monroe Freeling is a raw, developing tackle that could be just fine sitting for a year or just being like Olu Fashanu a few years ago with the Jets, where he was supposed to sit for the year but was coming in and starting for a lot of games at both right and left tackle. I think Freeling is a really, really interesting piece for this team. Then they go out in the second round and get Lee Hunter at defensive tackle. That I think this really helps complete their defensive line rebuild. Derek Brown. Bobby Brown is also going to be in that rotation in the interior defensive line. Jalen Phillips, Nick Scorton. This is a really good defensive line now of guys that all have really good instincts, guys that see the game really well. That was Hunter's main thing. He was that leading presence for that Texas Tech defense. And man, I love that pick. Then in round 3, Chris Brazzell. I know there were a lot of people that weren't the highest on him. Tennessee wide receiver. There were some concerns about his route running and what he could do outside of just vertical threats. But he was on that team a few years ago. What team was he? He was at Tulane a few years ago, I believe, where he was showing route running. And at the same time, I think this is a good good third round pick that adds a different type of receiver to their team that they could benefit from having with speed. Ted O'Rourke, McMillan, and Xavier Legette aren't the fastest guys in the world. Brazzell adds speed to this team. Will Lee in round 4. They love their A&M guys. Gig 'em. And another just good corner presence for later on. Sam Heggs in round 5. I like that pick too because they need some center depth. And he's a guy that's really a good mover on film. I wanted to see more strength from him on film, but it's a good late round pick at a position that they were starting to need a little bit after losing Cade Mays in free agency. I like this draft. And then Zake Waitley in the 5th round, another guy that could be a possible rotational player for them at safety. I really do like this draft for the Panthers. Love their offseason. The Chiefs draft, I liked a lot. And I know that this is a team that still has a lot of room to go in terms of rebuilding the roster, but the offensive line is in a good place. They still need to worry about right tackle in the long term, but defensively, they needed a lot of things to do. Quarterback, I mean, they figured out they signed a running back. Receiving core can always use some work. Defensively, that's where they needed to do their work. And Mansour Delane was their guy. They went up and got him. I understand giving up a 3rd round pick is a lot, and I scratched my head at the time too, but I understand it for the fact that they liked him. They think they can build their defense around him, and he costs a lot less than Trent McDuffie. Then at the end of the 1st round, they went and got Peter Woods, who, yes, is riding on a lot of the fact that he was a really high recruit that came in, was a well-thought-of freshman, really good sophomore. Then he was the highest ranked prospect going into 2025, and then let everyone down. But I think all of Clemson let everyone down. And I think that Peter Woods could be really interesting for this team and could be I'm not going to say he's going to replace Chris Jones in the long term, but that is a perfect player to develop behind and play next to because they play a lot alike. The duplicity of having Woods play in the interior, play in the 5-eye like Chris Jones does a lot of the time. I don't hate it at all. I like it, actually. R. Mason Thomas adds another speed element to this defensive line that I think they needed, a guy that can compete with Ashton Gilliette for that starting role opposite of George Karlaftis. Cyrus Allen in the 5th round I liked. Emmett Johnson in the 5th round I liked. They really addressed a lot of needs in this draft class. Jaden Canady was a surprising one in the 4th round, but don't hate it either. Just another safety option for him in the later rounds that I think Spags can get creative with. They dealt with a lot of needs in this draft class at running back depth, defensive line, and corner, and they did a good job of it. With Cleveland, they had clear needs. Tackle, wide receiver. Were they going to take a wide receiver first and a tackle, or a tackle and then wide receiver? Well, they dealt with the offensive line first, which is what they've done all season, all off season. And like Carolina, they did their job this offseason. They went in free agency. They took care of business with the offensive line, made some trades, got some veterans. Yeah, they've overpaid on Zion Johnson, but they're trying to rebuild this offensive line as quickly as possible to get this roster in a good position going forward for if they figure out quarterback anytime soon, which I don't know. But they got Spencer Fano, and that really could be interesting at left tackle. He tried that in college. It wasn't perfect before Caleb Lomu came in, kicked Spencer Fano to right tackle. But there is some duplicity there with him as well. He might play guard in the long term. There's a lot of areas he could play, and they could get really creative with him. And I think for now, they're going to try him at left tackle. Casey Concepcion, gig him. I loved this pick because I love Casey Concepcion, but I understood that it is a little bit concerning having him on a receiving core where he'd be looked at as possibly the number one guy or a guy that doesn't have a lot of talent around him. Denzel Boston, I'm not the biggest fan of, but adding him next to Casey Concepcion does things for me in the fact that these players have skill sets that complement each other. Boston being the physical presence that could be in the outside, has good hands, goes for a lot of jump balls. Concepcion is more of a slot guy. He can play on the outside a bit. He showed that more at NC State. He doesn't have the best hands. That's where people were concerned with him. But when you get the ball in his hands, he can get really creative. He can get downfield really fast. The speed is what his game is around. And that complements Boston's slower presence because speed and physicality, you know what I mean? And Cleveland really just went after it with the offense part in the early part of this draft. Gave them some flexibility to go out and get Emmanuel McNeil-Warren in the end of the 2nd round, who I am shocked fell there. I know he's a safety, but McNeil-Warren I was viewing as a really easy first rounder. He is so gifted in coverage, and Cleveland's defense just gets even better after having a season where Myles Garrett broke the sack record. Austin Barber at the end of the 3rd round, some more flexibility with their offensive line, a guy that they can develop in the short term as they have these veterans there. He played tackle in college, was viewed as one of the better tackles in the draft class early in the year. Parker Brailsford, another option for them to develop, and as Elton Jenkins is in his 30s. Royer, interesting piece in the later part of the 5th round, another tight end to add in that room. And Taylon Green. They have 4 quarterbacks in the roster again, and feels like more of a Todd Monken pick. He likes athletic quarterbacks, and Green was viewed as for a lot of people as a possible 2nd or 3rd best quarterback in the draft class. I didn't have him as that, but I still saw the athletic traits that were there that people liked. The Pittsburgh Steelers, the hometown team of the NFL draft. I really did like their draft class, to be honest. I know that there's people that are critical of their first round pick, Stephen A. Smith specifically. I'm never going to fault a team for going out and getting an offensive line. Roderick Jones has had struggles his entire career. They moved him from right tackle to left tackle. He was better there, but now he has a neck injury, and it's very questionable and has a setback for next year. Iron is a raw piece that you have on a 5-year contract, and you can move Fautanu to left tackle now, and he's been pretty good at right tackle. And you bring in Iron who's still this really raw prospect. He started playing football in 2021. That was the start of my last year in high school. I just graduated college. He has barely played. He has barely played football. You look down their board, Jeremy Bernard. It's a weird wide receiver fit considering that they have a slower wide receiver core, but I still think it works because of the veteran presence and adding someone in the building. Their 7th round picks, Robert Spears-Jennings. I think that was an underrated hit. I think that could really work if he makes it through training camp. There's a potential for him to be a real rotational piece at the safety position. And then Eli Hiddenrick, is that the way to pronounce it? Either way, he's a really, really interesting piece that at the very least will be a special teams player that will be vital for the Steelers. If better than that, he could be a rotational running back and slot wide receiver. Dalen Everett, I like the pick. Jennings Dunker adds to their interior offensive line where they still had questions. There's a reason why people were projecting guard to them in the 1st round. Jennings Dunker is an amazing pick they got in the late 3rd round. I love that pick for him because he can convert to guard and be that final piece on their offensive line. Drew Aller, I understand the criticism of that pick, but at the end of the day, they needed another quarterback, and I don't fault them for going out and getting Aller, who had a ton of tools and probably someone that Mike McCarthy really wanted. Also, in the 5th round, getting Riley Nowakowski, loved that pick. He's so good and has really good ball skills and was such a fun piece to watch in Indiana's title run last year. For the Raiders, every single offseason, I'm kind of left wondering, can this team actually make the jump the following season? And I don't know still, but I do know this. I loved the draft. Fernando Mendoza, I think it's pretty clear the reasons why they did what they did and why everyone's not really talking about it as much, because we've known this for months. We've known he was the best quarterback in this draft class. We know the Raiders had the number 1 overall pick. We know it made a ton of sense. And the only question was, if they trade this, that would be, or the only thing that was said was, if they trade this, that'd be the craziest thing that's happened in a long time. But if you look down their board, because that's what we didn't know, I think they did a good job. Their safety room was not very good last season. And safeties are always a position group that kind of gets ignored in the NFL for why defenses struggle. But Trenton Stukes adds so much versatility to this defense. A guy that played corner in college a lot of the time. He can play at multiple defensive back positions, and he'll probably be their long-term starter in the slot. I know they got Teron Johnson this offseason, but they can get really creative with him. You look down their board, Karen Crawford. I know there's a lot of people that are really excited about that because whether or not they trade Max Crosby, I don't think matters for this. They're moving on from their former 1st-round pick and Tyrese, Tyree Wilson, moving him to the Saints. They didn't get a lot of pass rush production from their other guys last year. I know they signed Kwity Paye, but Crawford is a really interesting 3rd-round piece that I think could offer them some pass rush juice. He has a good floor, too, with his strength. Trey Zune in the 3rd round. Interesting to me because a lot of NFL teams reportedly, Gig'em, by the way, view him as a center in the long term. They just signed Linderbaum to the biggest offensive line contract you'll ever see for an interior offensive lineman. But I think Zune gives him some good depth all around in the offensive line because he primarily played tackle in college. I know he's a smaller type of tackle, but he has experience there. He was really, really good in his 100 snaps at center in 2025 that made NFL teams insanely obsessed with him. So I think we'll see some plays there where he can maybe go at guard. Again, just more versatility there, like guys they added last year, like Charles Rogers, Charles Grant. Jermon McCoy, first pick of day 3. I mean, if someone was going to take a risk on him, why not the Raiders? They needed some corners. They needed some more depth there. And it's a day 3 pick. If he doesn't work out, he doesn't work out. You took a risk on a guy that was viewed as one of the best prospects in the entire draft class. Then you continue to move down the board. Mike Washington Jr. I think last year with some of their veteran depth behind Ashton Jeanty, they were going to need to replace that. Why not bring in someone that has a ton of athletic potential, but you don't have to necessarily rely on him to be a legitimate running back one, which is what people were talking about for him going into the draft. I like this pick a little bit because it just adds athletic depth at a position that you're already pretty set at. Again, I don't know whether or not the Raiders make a real jump next year, but I do like their draft class yet again, like last year, and think that there is potential for these guys to really just bring in real play at positions of need next year for them. I hope McCoy works out too. I'm not going to talk about every team still, but I wanted to bring up the Ravens because I did like their early picks a lot. Vega Ine and Zion Young, they just needed to address the trenches. Their defensive line wasn't getting to the quarterback very much last year, and Young has a lot of pass rush juice that I think could really complement Trey Hendrickson and Mike Green. Vega Ine, again, the offensive line was not very good last year, and it was the boring pick to take for this team in mock drafts, but it made sense for a reason. Simpson, who they just signed in free agency, is entering his 30s. They lost, or didn't lose, addition by subtraction with Daniel Falala leaving in free agency, but they needed to fill these guard spots, and they could do that with Ine. Also, Emory Jones is on the roster. They need to get creative with their center position. There's a lot of flexibility they have here now, which they didn't have before. They didn't have a year ago. And I think they're much better today in their interior offensive line than they were last year. You look down the board for them, and like Jacoby Lane, I'm not the biggest fan of that pick at that spot because I question Lane's versatility at the NFL level. I know there's a lot of people that are like, he makes crazy jump ball catches. He's physical downfield, but he's a leaner wide receiver, and it kind of scares me for how often he can get knocked off his routes for a guy that's supposed to be so physical with him being 6'4" and much slower than other wide receivers in this draft class. I think they went and got a receiver of a similar archetype in Elijah Sarratt in the 4th round, and that makes me like it a little bit more because both these receivers can compete for the same role on this team. A physical outside wide receiver that's going to try to break against man and make contested catches. Sarratt, I thought would go a little bit earlier than this. At one point, people were thinking maybe he's a potential early 2nd rounder. I didn't think that with the Omar Cooper Jr. hype going up and watching the tape and seeing that he was the main guy for Indiana, but I still thought Sarratt could be a physical wide receiver 3 on a good team. You look down their board still, Hibner adding physical tight ends that give them some flexibility with Kalar and likely leaving in free agency. Josh Cavallas from Bama in the 5th round. Chandler Rivers at one point was viewed as one of the better corners in this draft class going into the season. He doesn't have the ideal size you want in a corner, but I think you can get a little bit flexible with him with his ball skills. At the end of the day, with this Ravens draft class, I just think they added at positions that they desperately needed. Interior offensive line, defensive line, a tertiary wide receiver, tight end. And they really did a good job of attacking all of those in this draft class. I also have to mention the Miami Dolphins. I am not the biggest fan of the Caden Proctor pick at all. If you've watched my first round reaction, I don't love it. I don't think the Caleb Douglas pick in round 3 was very good. I think it was a massive, massive reach on a player that was being talked about as a 6th round pick. But if you look at their draft as a whole, they had so many hits on the board. I have to mention it. Chris Johnson, or so many chances to hit on the board. Chris Johnson, Jacob Rodriguez, Chris Bell, Kyle Lewis, Michael Taft, Kevin Coleman Jr. I think all of these guys can be legitimate players on this team. I mean, Johnson's a 1st round pick for a reason. He is extremely gifted and in a class with a lot of corner depth, but I would say instability at what these guys can be at the NFL level in terms of star power. I think Johnson's one of those guys that has one of the higher upsides in this entire draft class. Rodriguez, a guy that's, I would say his value is really hard to gauge because if you compare his tape to someone like Sonny Styles, it is athletic night and day. But Rodriguez tested so well athletically that I think it answered a lot of the questions with him in the pre-draft process because people thought, is this just him, an older guy in college getting athletic and being more experienced than everyone else, or is this the real deal? And I still can't totally answer that, but I think I feel a little bit more confident with him with how he tested and think he gives Miami security in a world where they might move on from Jordan Brooks as he's older. The team might give up another draft pick for him, and Rodriguez is a younger presence in the long term. Chris Bell and Coleman, 2 guys I thought that can go in the 3rd round and really be contributors for teams. Bell's coming off a torn ACL, but I still think He's a really good player with the ball in his hands. And if he can come back the same player that he was projecting to be, that's exciting for Miami. Coleman Jr., again, I have to keep mentioning him because I'm shocked he fell to the 5th round. I know that he's not the biggest receiver in the world, 5'10", 179, and he's slower. But the slot build, the ability to see the soft spots in zone coverage, the route running, I love. He has a natural instinct for the game that makes me really excited. Taff is a really interesting pick that got in the 5th round. Again, I don't know if he's a starting level player, but he's someone that I think could be a good depth piece for him. Kyle Lewis, I have to mention him. A lot of people it was really hard to gauge his value in this draft class because he is a tweener between linebacker and safety. He is extremely fast, but he's for a linebacker, but the reason why is because he's built like a safety. He is thinner. He is leaner than you would typically expect, but he hits hard. He loves hitting, and he gets low in his pads. Watch his tackles. It's really good, and he plays much stronger than his size would make you think. I do like Miami's draft class because of the amount of hits they had at the board. I don't love the Caden Proctor pick, and I don't love the Caleb Douglas pick, but the other picks make me excited that Miami's at least building around the depths of their roster and getting a good start to their rebuild. I'm going to get to my final few picks here. For the Saints, I like their draft. I know that there's people that aren't the biggest fans of Jordan Tyson because of the injuries, and that there are people that think that he isn't the player he once was, but I like Tyson a lot. The only concern has been the injuries for me, and the fact that now he's with an organization that has a history of a ton of player injuries. For whatever reason, the Saints and the Pelicans medical staffs have not been ideal. And this is a player that has had injuries. So it is a little bit concerning, but we'll see from there. But they did address a ton of needs. Christian Miller adds to an interior defensive line that I think needed more juice. I love that pick. I think he's a really, really good run defender and is just going to immediately bring someone that can offer some pass rush duplicity as well. But the run defending is where he's at his best. As well, Oscar Delp, someone that I think is a really, really interesting prospect in this draft class because of the fact that I don't think he was entirely used the way that he could have been at Georgia. I think he has a lot more skills than he was able to show at Georgia, and he does fit what the Saints like at tight end. I really think he could be an interesting weapon for Tyler Shuck. You look down their board, Bryce Lance, I like that pick. Think he can be an interesting piece that works out for him. Lorenzo Styles Jr., I wouldn't say he's going to be outstanding. I mean, he was towards the end of the 5th round, but I will say this with him. He is going to have enough athletic tools that he can make the roster and be a special teams player. And if he can develop into something, the athletic tools are there for him to eventually turn into something at safety. And then TJ Hall at the end, I think is a good value pick, adding some corner depth and seeing what that could be for someone in the 7th round that had a lot of experience in college and success at Iowa. With the Jets, they had multiple picks in the 1st round, 3. This is a team that has had so many picks in the 1st round in this decade. And I think they had the most going into this draft class. And then this just continues to add to it. And then they have 3 again next year. My God. Okay. I talked about their 1st round a lot. I'll talk about it a little bit here again. Although I disagree with the David Bailey pick over Alvaro Reese in terms of what the roster had in terms of potential in the long term, I still think that Bailey is a fine enough player that it doesn't totally knock away their draft class for me. I liked Kenyon Sadiq. I liked Omar Cooper Jr. I know there's people that are still critical of these picks because Makai Lemon was on the board, but I can't totally knock against them for this. Teams like doing 12-man personnel. I question this coaching staff in the long term, but I don't question this roster a lot now. I think this offensive roster is in a really good spot. Their offensive line, interior-wise, needs to be a little bit more secure because of the shakeups they've had this offseason. Simpson leaving in free agency, Vera Tucker leaving in free agency, Tippmann, if he's going to be the center or right guard for a while, and Parham coming in and him still having questions from his time in Vegas. But they have 2 really good tackles. They have Garrett Wilson, Omar Cooper Jr., Kenyon Sadiq, and Adonai Mitchell. That is a good group of flexibility there. And then in the 3rd round, they went out and got D'Angelo Pons, who, if his size, if he was just like a few inches taller, he'd be an easy, for sure, 1st round pick. I know he's 5'8", and that is a little bit of a concern. But the guy has more football instincts than some players do after a decade in this league. He's extremely, extremely gifted in terms of his knowledge of the game. He is undersized. I understand that. But he is quick, he's sticky, he'll play on a guy. He probably is going to be more of a nickel, and that's fine. I think that this would be a good team for him because they need corner, because they need someone in that spot, and his pro comp is Aaron Glenn, ESPN had. I think in the third round, them getting Darrell Jackson was also an interesting player get because he can be a rotational piece for him, give him some size in the interior. Cade Klubnik, I didn't love that pick, but again, at the end of the day, he's a guy that can probably be viewed as a long-term backup more than anything else. And yeah, the top of their draft is what was really the most important. And the Jets, again, go out and get a bunch of players in the first round that a lot of people like. We just have to see if they ever do anything with them. The Giants, staying in New York, Arvo Reese, Francis Maui-Noa in the top 10. They went with best player available at 5, and I totally understand it. It gives you flexibility at linebacker and edge rusher for the long term, and you were just getting the best player available. And typically, those type of picks age pretty well, in my opinion. Francis Maui-Noa at 10. It was between him and Caleb Downs. I know that there's people that are critical because they didn't get Caleb Downs, but this offensive line, especially in the interior, needed more. And Maui-Noa probably will sit in the interior for a few years and then fully take over at right tackle. I know it's hard to convert from guard to tackle. Maybe it's Illuminor that could be the one that goes to guard, but I still think that the getting flexibility in your offensive line with a player that was viewed as the best offensive lineman in this draft, it's never going to hurt. It is never going to hurt. Down the board, I know that this is still a team that desperately needs interior defensive line. They needed it before the Dexter Lawrence trade, even more so now. But Colton Hood, he fell out of the first round. You have to take a chance at that position since it's been an issue for you for a long time. Deonte Banks hasn't worked. I know they signed Greg Newsome, but he was not very good with the Jaguars last year. It was a huge reason they lost against the Bills in the playoffs. Paulson Adebo, they needed another corner, and Colton Hood was so good at Tennessee last year that you take the risk there and just hope that you can get into your defensive line later down the line. Malachi Fields in the third round I liked. I think that adding another physical outside presence is never going to hurt, and he's a guy that a lot of people viewed it as a potential riser into the second round in this draft class. He's an interesting prospect because of the I would say, smaller production he had in college, how long it took for him to get to this spot, but him being just another playmaker for Jackson Dart is never going to hurt. Their later picks, not going to totally grade. They were 6th rounders. They gave up their 4th and 5th to move up for Malachi Fields, but their first 5 picks are ones that I think, or 4 picks are going to be ones that immediately impact this roster and ones that I liked for the long term. Our final team, the Philadelphia Eagles. I think moving up and getting Makai Lemon, a heck of a move. They spent this offseason building out the receiving core for the eventual A.J. Brown trade. Then they go out and trade up to go get Makai Lemon. I liked it. And as a Cowboys fan, I hated it, but from a Cowboys fan perspective, from just watching and understanding Howie and respecting what Howie does, man, you got to respect that. Makai Lemon is my wide receiver number 1 in this draft class. As a fan, I'm left over here screaming, how do they keep getting away with it? Why does Philly keep drafting some of my favorite players in the draft every year? Why do they keep going up and getting these guys that make so much sense for them? And this draft, like every other draft of Philly, is just preparing for the inevitable. A.J. Brown trade. Dallas Goedert probably leaving. He's on a 1-year deal at this point. He is in his 30s. Go out and get a replacement that's similar to him in Eli Stowers. He's not a total tight end build, but Stowers fits what the NFL currently has at tight ends, and also gives him some more depth there, gives him a guy that is really, really athletic and is going to force Jalen Hurts to throw in the middle of the field. We'll talk about that in just a second. Markel Bell, a tackle project that I think could be someone you could develop and have grow behind a Lane Johnson type. You needed more depth in your offensive line, and this is an organization that historically, even though Jeff Stoutland retired, they still have a good offensive line staff, and that has historically been good at developing offensive linemen. Towards the end, I'm not totally taking into account their picks towards the end. It's later round picks. Philly sometimes gets a guy in there, sometimes they don't. But their first 3 picks I had to bring up because they were good moves. And the Jalen Hurts part. Makai Lemon and Eli Stowers are going to be the true test for if Jalen Hurts in this offense can really, really target that middle of the field. I know Eagles fans roll their eyes, say he can. He did it with Steichen. That people and analysts across the league are biased against them. But every analyst has been screaming this over the last few seasons. They won't target the middle of the field, and it is a problem for their offense. And it really showed in 2025. These 2 players will force Jalen Hurts to throw in that middle of the area. And It's not sink or swim, but it's more of a let's allow Hurts to show that he can do this. I didn't want to go through every draft, but I wanted to go through a bunch of them because this is such a weird draft class. This is a draft class that's for the sickos, the ones that are paying attention on day 2 and day 3 and wondering, all right, what does this fit look like in the 5th round? Because this isn't one of those draft classes that has a ton of quarterbacks at the top, a ton of blue chip talents. I loved this draft class for that reason, that it's a little bit different. And that is what makes the draft so fun, is that each one is different every single year. We're already talking about 2027 being this massive, overwhelming draft class. And that's fun. That's going to be something that I really look forward to come fall. But for now, I like this draft. Let me know your thoughts down below. If I missed your team, if you think that I didn't do your team right, if I missed a point about your team, or if you feel like your team did way better than some of the other teams I mentioned. I just wanted to get through a lot of teams that I did like and get some of my thoughts out there without making this an hour-long video, because I could talk about these drafts all day long. I hope y'all enjoyed. I love each and every one of you. Thank you for staying tuned for my content, watching my content, and enjoying my content, I hope. This is Son of a Sports. I'll catch y'all next time.